Well, hello and welcome, everyone. My name's Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Week 2 of the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin today, we'd like to take a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll. For best results, we want you to make sure you're viewing the presentation from the Zoom application. If you attended our first week of the Grants Conference, you know that our virtual conference is taking place over 2 weeks with 2 sessions per day. And the content for this webinar series is similar to what it would be for an in-person grants conference. All of these sessions have been pre-recorded. However, we will be taking live Q&A. For information about the sessions and our speakers, please visit the conference website. If you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. We're encouraging attendees to upvote questions. To upvote a question, navigate to the Q&A function and click on the thumbs up button. This will bring the most popular questions to the top of the Q&A window. We are answering your questions as they come in, and we will continue to answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Please keep in mind that we have quite a large audience for these sessions, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions. This session is being recorded, and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com, in the coming weeks, and we'll send an email announcement as soon as those sessions have been posted. If you do have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please use the Q&A and someone will assist you. Thank you for participating in our poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us as this marks our first ever virtual grants conference. And we've been doing these conferences for a long time at NSF. And while they began as small one-day events with a handful of program staff, they've grown over the years to be 2 full days and now a virtual event taking place over 2 weeks. We hope that you enjoy all of the sessions that you attend this week. I'm now pleased to present this session titled Financial Reviews, Site Visits and Audit Resolution, and this session will be covered by Mark Dufour from the Division of Institution and Award Support at NSF.
Welcome to the Financial Reviews, Audit Monitoring, and Audit Resolution section of this year's Grants Conference. My name is Mark Dufour, and I am a Grants and Contract Analyst within the Cost Analysis and Pre-Award branch of the National Science Foundation. I would like to give you some background on the Cost Analysis branch and the Resolution and Advanced Monitoring branch here at NSF. We are located within the Division of Institution and Award Support underneath the Office of Budget and Financial and Award Management. The work performed at the Cost Analysis and Pre-Award branch, along with the Resolution and Audit Monitoring branch, are broken up into 3 very distinct categories. The first of which is financial reviews. Pre-award reviews, such as FL99s, along with indirect cost rate negotiations. The next category is advanced monitoring. Advanced monitoring consists of such topics such as site visits, desk reviews, targeted reviews, and business system reviews. And last but certainly not least, audit resolution of OIG audits and single audits, which have formerly been referred to as A133 audits up until the creation of the Uniform Guidance. Pre-award financial reviews. In-house, we refer to these as FL99s. These are for new and infrequent awardees. The reviews are requested after an award has been recommended for funding. The process will be on hold until this is completed, so the turnaround time on these are expected to be quick. During the review, we typically look at the project cost accounting system, along with time and effort reporting, financial viability, so we can make sure that the institution is able to sustain operations without NSF funding, along with high-risk budget categories such as participant support, subawards, and salaries. We do ask that you have written policies and procedures for all of these areas prior to applying for the award. Please ensure that the representative who provides the response is someone who is knowledgeable about what we're requesting. It is up to the organization to provide a full and appropriate response. If the organization is not able to demonstrate their current ability to be in compliance, this can result in an administrative decline. We do not use this time to provide any business assistance or consulting advice to potential awardees. We are in the role of assessing the response provided within a quick turnaround. If you have any further questions on this, please review the Prospective New Awardee Guide on the NSF website. Written policies and procedures during the pre-award process. The prospective awardee will need to have written policies and procedures. As I mentioned in the previous slide, please feel free to review the PAPPG, also known as the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. This outlines that the awardee must have an allowable cost policy. The allowable cost policy must document compliance with 2 CFR 200.302 Part B Subpart 7. Other written policies and procedures that will be required are subrecipient monitoring and participant support costs. Subrecipient monitoring will have to be addressed on the pre and post side of the subrecipient. On the pre side, the awardee must evaluate the subrecipient's risk of noncompliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the subaward for purposes of determining the appropriate subrecipient. On the post side, the awardee will be required to monitor the activities of the subrecipient as necessary to ensure the subaward is being used for authorized purposes in compliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the award. Also, the awardee is responsible that the subaward performance goals are being achieved. In the participant support written policies and procedures, the accounting system must be able to segregate out participant support costs along with pre-approval to transfer budget out to another category. The awardee must also receive approval to transfer money from the stipend, travel, and subsistent categories to F4 participant support other costs. Cooperative agreements. During a cooperative agreement financial review, these are typically performed with well-established organizations, so we do not dive into administrative reviews on those. We do have a budgetary review where the awardee has to provide supporting documentation for budget line items. This will include such things as quotes, invoices, bids, or salary data. The application of indirect cost rates, and high-risk areas such as participant support costs and subrecipients. In subrecipient line items, there needs to be a pre-assessment of risk in accordance with 2 CFR 200.331 Part B and Part C, along with post-award monitoring from Uniform Guidance 2 CFR 200.331 Part D. And then finally, there will be other issues or concerns that have been identified throughout the history of the awarding institution. The CAP team also performs indirect cost rate negotiations. Here at NSF, we negotiate indirect cost rates for approximately 100 awardees. These consist of nonprofits and museums for the most part, as we do not negotiate with colleges and universities, as those tend to be cognizant of HHS. The cognizance of an indirect cost rate can change based upon government funding levels. At NSF, we try to apply a modified total direct cost base when negotiating indirect cost rates. This is in compliance with uniform guidance. However, there are certain circumstances where we will use a different cost base. Modified total direct cost means all salaries and wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to the first $25,000 of each subaward. Modified total direct cost also excludes equipment, capital expenditures, charges for patient care, rental costs, tuition remission, scholarships and fellowships, participant support cost. Common findings while negotiating indirect cost rates are subcontracts or subawards, as you're only allowed to claim the first $25,000 for the life of the award. Equipment or materials, as equipment is excluded from modified total direct cost base, and just unallowables being claimed in the cost pool, such as meals when an employee is not on travel, or alcohol. NSF performs many monitoring activities. Throughout the agency, NSF is performing monitoring activities here at both CAP and RAM. Each of the activities we perform involves some aspect of monitoring, which is inherent in all of the activities performed by CAP and RAM. For instance, we often identify issues during activities like audit resolution, post-award adjustment reviews, indirect cost negotiations that lead to recommendations for desk reviews or site visits. As part of our pre-award FL99 reviews, which are budget and accounting system reviews performed by the CAP branch, we review our monitoring history with the awardees in order to assess risk and guide our scope. The same applies to other CAP activities like indirect cost rate negotiations. In addition to monitoring NSF funds, our goal at DIAS is to provide business assistance and help awardees better manage funds that have been awarded. Our business assistance is provided usually during our site visits or outreach activities like this one today. NSF's portfolio management strategy is made up of three components that feed into each other. Our big driver is the annual risk assessment, which we use to allocate our resources for awardees in need of monitoring and business assistance. The risk assessment is performed annually to identify the activities to be performed in a given year. The results of these activities are also used to inform next year's risk assessment. The risk assessment determines site visits and desk reviews that are performed each year. The assessment is also used by other NSF offices to conduct baseline monitoring activities, such as the large facilities. Comprehensive monitoring activities augment routine or automated baseline activities with focused advanced monitoring activities to provide broad coverage of the award portfolios. These activities are designed to mitigate the risk of non-compliance with the federal grant. And 3, gathering feedback and incorporate monitoring results to enable NSF to better target business assistance activities and to make continuous improvements to the risk assessment model and monitoring procedures. Our colleagues in DGA and DFM perform baseline monitoring activities that often feed into the RAM's advanced monitoring activities. This feedback allows us to greater pinpoint these organizations that may be struggling or who are at risk for non-compliance at outreach, and outreach is necessary. As part of advanced monitoring, we have an annual risk assessment process. NSF conducts an annual risk assessment of the awards and awardee institutions within its award portfolio to prioritize awardees for advanced monitoring. We rank awards based on risk points. This includes dollar amount, type of award, the type of costs, and the complexity of award. Then we also rank the awardees by risk points. If NSF is cognizant, or if the awardee is new, then they would be considered more risky. Our focus tends to be on small to mid-sized entities between $2 million and $15 million in award funding, with minimal federal and NSF funding with the goal of providing business assistance to ensure they get off to a good start. Typically, once you have more than $15 million, you've hit the ground and you're running. Over the years, the risk assessment has been adjusted to give more points to high-risk awards. What we tend to look for in advanced monitoring: general management and organizational structure, accounting and financial systems, personnel compensation, subawards and subrecipient monitoring, participant support costs, and equipment. I would like to stress that having strong internal controls over management and federal funding is really important for this. Targeted reviews, also known as TRAs. These are quick targeted review of an awardee internal controls over a specific area of compliance. TRAs are used by NSF to follow up on compliance concerns identified by DGA, DIAS, and even the OIG. RAM started using them in 2017 for a quick review of internal controls in place of specific compliance areas identified through the risk assessment. These also generally have a quick turnaround time. From selection to completion is usually around 90 days. These are typically performed by an NSF contractor. At the moment, that would be Atlas Research LLC. In 2019, these were used to follow up on compliance concerns identified by OIG during one of their reviews. We are currently considering using TRAs to provide business assistance to specific groups of entities found to struggle with compliance, such as smaller entities and not-for-profits. Next are desk reviews. These focus on the awardee's ability to manage federal funds, including but not limited to award administration policies and practices. This has been a successful and cost-effective tool for NSF that helps identify compliance issues. These may result in a follow-up site visit. These are performed on a case-by-case basis. If there are issues that prevent an awardee from providing a prompt response, we ask that you inform the lead analyst who will contact you and explain the situation to them. These will focus on ACMS, general policies and procedures. Results from the desk review will be communicated with the awardee, and if anything is required after, that will require a follow-up. Some desk reviews may be used in preparation for a site visit to shorten the duration of the site visit. This now leads me into site visits. These are usually a week in duration. Our sole purpose is business assistance. We strongly suggest recipients heed our input when problem areas are identified, because if the same finding would happen to appear in an audit report, we know that we've made the recommendation and the question costs are more likely to be disallowed during the audit resolution process. During the site visit, some items that we look for are effective performance of NSF awards, adequate segregation of duties and adequate level of review, adequate policies and procedures for specific compliance areas, adequate tracking of award expenditures and adequate systems and controls to prevent cost overruns, adequate documentation of all expenditures maintained. We will perform some transaction testing. After our visit is complete, we provide the awardee with a letter of our results and a list of recommendations. If there are recommendations, the awardee will be given a short window to respond to how they plan on correcting these. Each year, the resolution team performs approximately 30 site visits, as this is mandated by Congress. Based on technology advances and funding concerns, we have been allocating more of these to virtual visits. And with the travel restrictions imposed by COVID-19, this appears to be pushing more site visits that way. Business system reviews. These are performed at large facilities. Staff from the CAP and RAM are sometimes asked to perform the role of subject matter experts for BSRs. Due to involvement in rate negotiation and pre-award budget reviews, they perform prior to awards being made to facilities. These are typically performed on the 26 larger facilities along with the federally funded research and development centers, also known as FFRDCs. Please allow me to stress that staff across the agency, from program to grants office to LFO, work together to resolve compliance matters. For example, DFM may find something they bring to the attention of RAM, and then RAM takes issue with things that they've identified during audit resolution to DFM. The purpose of these are to ensure compliance with federal NSF requirements. Typically, these are conducted once every 5 years. However, if issues are identified, these can occur more frequently. Audit resolutions. There are NSF OIG audits along with single audits, also known as A133 audits. There are many roles and responsibilities of all the parties involved in an audit resolution. The audits are based on an annual plan and conducted in compliance with government auditing standards. After a very long and often rocky history, NSF and the NSF OIG are enjoying a strong and collaborative relationship, where we meet monthly and engage in efforts towards joint stewardship. Via the Stewardship Collaborative, representatives from NSF management, responsible for audit resolution, and OIG management meet monthly to discuss emerging issues, concerns, and trends related to audit finding and the audit resolutions. Efforts are made on a daily basis by both sides to share information and enhance the process of an audit resolution for recipients. During the audit, the awardee is expected to provide all requested information to the auditors. And then post-audit, the awardee addresses recommendations from the audit during the resolution process with NSF management. At the operation level, NSF resolution staff and NSF OIG audit managers also meet monthly to discuss specific audit reports, findings, policy interpretation, etc. It is also the responsibility of NSF management to resolve audit findings and recommendations with the auditee. Finally, in the event of escalated disagreements, the audit follow-up official will make a final determination. Audit areas driving OIG question costs. During this slide, I would like to go into some depth of some of the most common question cost areas and maybe a little bit of advice on how to mitigate them. First is equipment purchase and allocation. Equipment and allocation findings go hand in hand. Awardees need to be aware of new language in 2 CFR 200-405, which now requires them to document the basis for allocating the costs. So if an awardee purchases a new laptop or a piece of equipment at the end of an award, why was it necessary? And how was that determined that it would be necessary that all of this cost has to be on that singular award? An auditor's goal is to ensure NSF only pays for the portion of the benefit received by the specific NSF award, not pay for the entire piece of equipment. The uniform guidance requires that if a cost benefits 2 or more projects or activities in proportions that can be determined without undue effort or costs, these costs must be allocated to all the projects based on the proportional benefit. When costs benefit multiple awards, it is good to know the basis behind the charges, such as usage, time, and not just based on available funding. The PI signing off on a percentage allocation on a transfer form is not reasonably documented basis for allocation. You must have documentation to support why this is a reasonable cost on the award. NSF continues to resolve these on a case-by-case basis. The recipient should expect disallowances to increase based on the new language in 2 CFR 200.405. So what can you do to mitigate this? If you do not have written policies and procedures for allocation, we recommend you establishing those as soon as possible. The PIs do need to be educated on the use of purchased equipment on follow-on awards is not a justification for allocability. It is helpful if necessary purchases are documented in the final project report. It is also recommended that additional reviews and controls for purchases are made within the last 90 days of an award. Lack of supporting documentation. For award charges, travel, supply, compensation, etc., specifically, follow your institution's policies and procedures. For an example, let's take travel. It would be good to have a reason for the travel, why it's happening, was it planned out in advance, and how this is going to be paid for. Next is unreasonable and unnecessary question costs. Large material and supply purchases near the end of an award, the uniform guidance states that materials and supplies used for performance may be charged as a direct cost. So statements that the purchase was to restock supplies and inventory are not going to be acceptable. Meals are also an unallowable cost unless the employee is on travel status per 2 CFR 200-435. And another example of this is visa issues, which cannot be claimed on one award if an employee on visa status works on other awards. This also needs to be prorated. This brings me to participant support costs. These may not be budgeted to cover room rentals, catering costs, supplies, etc. that's related to an NSF-sponsored grants conference. These should be budgeted as other direct costs, line G6 other. Charges for contracts and/or goods or services are not participant support costs. IDCs are not applied to participant support costs, and you must document the eligibility of the participation by trainees. Payments made on behalf of the participants, such as stipends and per diems. And participant support costs definitely cannot be spent on employees. Question costs for compensation. Cost disallowances have been related to charges in excess of institutional base salary. Also, lack of documentation related to after-the-fact confirmations and approvals. Typically, compensation is limited to 2 months of salary. Research sometimes can overlap with academic appointments. Additional time might be needed based on an appointment. As long as it does not change or interfere with the award objectives, that's okay. Non-compliance. Be aware of all award terms and conditions, regulations, and institutions' policies and procedures. An example of non-compliance would be indirect costs being charged inappropriately, resulting in overcharges to NSF awards. Finally, subawards. Failure to request approval for subs that were not initially budgeted, an assessment by program on how this affects the scope of the project will be needed. Auditors are coming across instances where awardees have failed to get NSF approval for project effort transferred to another entity. Failure to develop adequate subaward agreements, which this would include the criteria outlined in 2 CFR 200-331. Some examples of this will be the subrecipient name, the period of performance, and the obligated amount. And this all must be documented prior to the start of the subaward. Effective with NSF 19-1 PAPPG, subawards have been updated to clarify the description and scope of the work must be performed by the subaward included in the project description. Be sure to have internal controls that ensure NSF approval is obtained to avoid cost disallowance. I would also like to add for this that any costs that are questioned and have IDCs applied to them, the corresponding IDCs will also be questioned. As I mentioned earlier with the Stewardship Collaborative, the resolution of OIG question costs have gotten better. Over the last few years, the audit resolution team has been working with the OIG, and as you can see here, in 2014, 9% of the question costs were sustained. And in 2018, 85% of question costs were sustained. Efforts by OIG to improve interactions with reviews of recipients has been very successful. Findings and question costs identified are more accurate than ever before. Through educating contractor auditors at the OIG, sharing internal resolution details has really been a huge success for NSF. I would also like to point out on this slide that the number of OIG escalations has went down since 2010, and we have consistently had 0 for the last 4 years. The keys to success for awardees. Maintain strong internal controls in writing and adhere to them. I would like to note that as of November 12, 2020, the uniform guidance has been updated. Keep a watchful eye on expenditures. Is it reasonable? Is it necessary? Is it able to be allocated to the award? Understand award requirements and expectations, terms and conditions, NSF policy, OMB guidance. Get prior approval when required. Maintain adequate supporting documentation for all charges made to the federal award. If you have any questions, be sure to ask early and ask often. Any conversation had with NSF staff, such as program officers, are best documented in an email. If you have any additional questions, you can reach out to me, Mark Dufour, the Grants Cost Analyst. Then the branch chief of RAM is Rochelle Ray, and the CAP branch chief is Charlie Ziegler. I would like to thank you for participating today, and if you have any questions, we're going to open up a Q&A session.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to be joined now by Mark and by our colleague Beatriz Azor, who've both been furiously typing answers to your questions in the Q&A session. So if you guys could reveal yourselves. Hi, Beatriz and Mark. So thank you all for sticking around and for submitting your questions. I see that both Beatriz and Mark have answered a number of the questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. So do take a look at those if you've submitted those questions or if you're curious as to the answers. And please do feel free to continue to submit questions to us. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the ones that we have and that folks have upvoted, and have you all respond to those. So first question is, what if an employee is 100% on a project when their visa costs were processed, but 8 months later gets pulled into another project and their effort is changed to 50-50 on 2 awards? Do we need to retroactively prorate the visa fees?
I think that you would have to go back and reallocate that, because I'm trying to think about it from an OIG perspective. And if the employee was not working on the same project 100% of the time, they might question that. I don't know if Beatriz has anything to add, but that's where I'm going with that, is would it get questioned by the OIG?
Yeah, I agree with you. They have to. So whoever is working on a project and he has a visa, every expense that goes with that person just goes along with the person. So you would have to definitely reallocate, or otherwise we cannot, it would not be identifiable to the person or to the project.
Because it has to be allocable to the project.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give some examples of good and or poor time and effort reporting documentation?
Bad or poor time and effort reporting documentation is no time and effort reporting documentation. In a previous life, I was an auditor, and if you couldn't trace it back, if you couldn't track it, follow it, certify it, verify it, then that would be all examples of things that are poor. Typically, we see things that are certified by the employee, then approved by the PI or someone in the division, whether that be a dean or an assistant dean, and then these are kept on file throughout the duration of the award and for many years after.
a good time and effort reporting system, or good time and effort reporting documentation, is a system that shows all effort reported, all compensation, 100% of what the employee is working on. You can identify the projects they're working on. Is signed by a supervisor, or it has some policy that has internal controls attached to it. So it's really important that the internal controls are always considered when it comes to time and effort. So an employee is not signing their own time, or signing each other's time when they're not aware of what they're working on. So a good time and effort reporting is one that also includes good internal controls.
One thing that Beatriz mentioned that I want to reemphasize is it has to show 100% of all time worked by that employee, not just 100% of the time worked on a grant effort. So if the employee is working on multiple grants, or working on administrative tasks, or teaching, then all the time has to be accounted for, and it has to be 100%, not 110%, not 90%.
Okay. The next question is about participant support. And the question is, as you can see, is based on the statement that employees cannot be participants. So the question is, if there are grad students at the organization and are paid as personnel from the organization, are they not allowed to be considered participant on an NSF funded project?
Are they employed by the?
So again, it's going to depend, I guess, on their role on the project. Are they being paid for their work on the project versus are they attending a training at an NSF sponsored workshop or conference? But I'll let you all go ahead.
It's all about the status of the employee. If they're employed by the organization, they're employees. They can attend. It's just that they cannot be claimed under participant support. Participant support is strictly for outside, people that come from outside to participate of a conference or a symposia. Is not meant to be for employees.
I would just add to that, if you have a student who is paid, is doing something that is non-research related, that is paid for by the university, they could be considered a participant if their primary purpose was to actually receive that training as a participant.
Right. Yeah.
But so if they're working in a cafeteria, for example, we don't want that to preclude them from working as being considered a participant.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. It appears from the presentation that to the extent that the criteria for the assessment is based on size of the organization or research budgets, that there is an assumption that small or newer equals small, or that small equals newer institutions. Does it impact the assessment if that is not the case?
We're talking about the risk assessment, right, for the site visits?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
I think we are talking about that.
Yeah, for the site visits, the risk assessment is based on the awards and, the amount of funding that the organization receives. I think there's a perception of this is, we're selected to be audited. These are not audits. These are actually business assistance reviews. And what we do, and I'm just trying to clear it, make sure that people understand that this is actually a good thing when NSF tells you that they're coming for a site visit. It's not an audit. Is the time that you will have NSF to come and visit and help you make sure that the policies and procedures in place that you have, the processes in place that you have are working well. We have this question a lot because people get a little nervous and it's like, I don't want to be on that list, but it's all based on the awards. It's all based on what we think that, the organizations that we think that might need the business assistance. So generally, institutions that have a lot of funding with us, they will show more because, of course, there's more awards. So there's more opportunities to show in the risk assessment. But it's not necessarily because I'm small, I'm big, or, it doesn't matter. It's all in the same pool and it's based on the awards. It's not based on the institutions.
Okay. Let's see. Next question is, this person is asking about designating PI and co-PI in Fastlane. There is not a specific place in the application to upload senior personnel, collaborators, and other affiliations, BioSketch, and other support. Where should these be uploaded in Fastlane? And these, I'll take this one. That these should be those should be uploaded as a single PDF in the other supplementary documents section of the proposal. Okay. Somebody's asking for a link to the new uniform guidance. We'll get that to you in a moment. Let's see. If the proposal was submitted without asking for foreign travel, and when it is awarded, the PI determines that this is needed, does this require prior approval, and is travel to Canada and Mexico considered as foreign travel? I guess I can answer that as well if you like. But Canada and Mexico, last time I checked, were not in the United States. So yes, those are considered foreign. So yeah. But if you want to take the first part of that. The
first part of it, yeah. So anything that would change the scope of the project, it needs to be approved by a program officer. That seems like something significant. I would always clear it with your program officer before making any moves on transactions like that.
Okay. What is the guidance on hardware maintenance or networking equipment that is part of a program? Can we submit maintenance costs for the length of the program, specifically if it is a 24-month award, but we don't get the equipment until month 6? Can we claim full 24 months of maintenance or only 18 months of maintenance?
What kind of maintenance? That's not clear, because sometimes it's something minor, so it all depends on what maintenance we're talking about, what kind of equipment we're talking about here.
Okay.
And because if it's something that's going to stay with the organization, then that maintenance can be part of the indirect cost. If it's going to be, I mean, it's not clear. It's not clear on what kind of.
So Mark or Beatriz, if one of you could in the chat section just drop one of your email addresses in so somebody could follow up with you directly with a little bit more.
I'm doing that now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is, the presenter Mark referred to laptop as equipment. Is a computer an equipment at any cost, or it is a supply if it's less than $5,000?
So it depends on what your institution's policies say equipment is. So some places say equipment starts at $1,000, and then so in that case it would have to be classified as equipment. But some computers will cost more than $5,000, and then it becomes an equipment instead of supplies.
Okay. Is foreign travel considered funds spent in a foreign country and be included in reports? I'm not sure I understand the.
So it wouldn't be all funds. It would be per diems, car rentals. That's how I'm interpreting this question. Because things that are classified as travel costs are typically hotels, car rentals, sometimes your per diem.
And yes, and they're allowable costs as long as they're traceable and as long as they're related to the project specifically. In these cases, we usually tell people that have lots of documentation to make sure that is supported, that the visit to the foreign country and the expenses that go along with that are well supported.
What documentation is needed for subawardees that will be using the de minimis indirect cost rate?
No documentation is required. It's a de minimis rate. You don't have to submit a proposal or anything for that 10%.
Okay, another participant support cost question. Suppose my budget did not allow for participant costs, but now participant costs are needed. Do we need prior approval to reallocate funds from another area, say travel, for example?
That sounds like a change in scope if you're holding now an event that will have participants in it. So I would contact the program officer definitely on that.
Okay.
If there's ever a situation where you're unsure if something's allowable, it's always good to get it in writing from your program officer.
Would a meal expense for a business meeting concerning the grant be allowable? What documentation is required for this if allowable?
Meals are typically only allowable when the employee is on travel status. So you would have to provide documentation that they're both on travel status outside of the area. So typically travel status is anything more than 50 miles from your home office.
Okay. If a project has a no-cost extension, would it be reasonable for the PI to take an extra month of salary, for example, on top of that was already budgeted in the project?
You would have to get the additional salary approved, but I mean, you have the ability to transfer funds between categories, except for participant support costs. So
okay.
As long as you're staying within the scope of the project and within the budgetary amounts, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, as a first-time nonprofit awardee, we want to make sure we are doing things correctly and may have a specific question on how to handle something since this is our first time. Is this the group of people we can reach out to get those questions answered? And by group of people, they're referring to Beatriz and Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you recommend for somebody who wanted to, who was new and wanted to get all of the information they needed?
There's a lot of information in the new awardee guide, but if you have questions, you can always reach out to either one of us. There's also the lead for FL99s for pre-award reviews that he can also, that's Lawrence Dash. His name is on our website. They can also shoot him an email and ask for questions, if they have any questions. They should be also in contact with their grants officer or, their grant specialist as soon as they're referred, or their award is going to be processed. And they are usually also very knowledgeable, and they know when it comes to the NSF guidance, they know everything, about it.
Next question is, what type of documentation would be ideal to justify the basis for allocating costs across projects?
I guess it would depend on what kind of costs that we're talking about. So if it's like a laser and it's being used by multiple projects, then it's going to be housed in a specific room. You could have a sign-in sheet or a schedule of sorts for when people are in there using it. And then it would have to accommodate 100% of the time that item's being used. Okay.
As a nonprofit working towards a first submission, we noted your expression of concern with nonprofit compliance issues. Could you say more about the nonprofit issues you cited with some coaching on what we should best avoid? Can you provide some guidance to new nonprofit organizations submitting proposals to NSF? The new awardee guide is helpful, this person says.
I don't think there's a concern with nonprofits, from not-for-profits specifically. But we find a lot of small organizations that have never dealt with federal funding and that need a little more guidance. And it's not necessarily something negative. It's just that, just feel free to contact us. Don't feel like we will dismiss you. We will definitely try to answer every question you guys have. And the earlier, the better. We find that when people contact us and ask questions and as often as early is much better in the long run. It's much better for the project and for their grants management in general. Right, Rochelle?
Yeah, I would just add to that, Beatrice, that for less experienced nonprofits is what I will refer to you as. For those institutions, a lot of times what we're seeing when we do site visits, when we do some of our desk reviews and things like that, we're seeing things like lack of supporting documentation, lack of written policies and procedures. So, a lot of times we find that the organizations can tell us how they deal with compliance in a certain area, but they cannot show us the written documentation. And when you don't have written documentation or written policies and procedures, if somebody leaves your organization and comes in new, they don't have anything to go by. And so they're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So those are the areas that we see issues in for nonprofits and smaller organizations usually.
Yeah, it's usually, like I said, the lack of experience, and that's not necessarily something, it's just, it is what it is. And now you have some, contact people that you can, send us an email here at NSF, and we definitely are willing to help you out. We cannot consult, but we will answer your questions.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. Let's see. Would providing fixed stipends in lieu of travel funding be allowable for participant support costs? And there's some additional detail in the question if you take a look there. It says, in our budget justification, we budgeted participant support costs as travel and subsistence support for attendance to annual meetings. But with the pandemic, our PI had to shift plans because not a lot of people are traveling, and they are organizing an online workshop for undergraduate students.
That is something it doesn't sound like the scope or the objective of the project is changing, but I would definitely talk to the program officer first about it. And if need be, I would reach out to the grants officer. I think it's something that can be done, but it just needs to be very well documented with the rationale behind why you're doing it. And certainly the pandemic would, definitely be part of that rationale. Just be very careful to document everything. And I would, again, talk to the program officer and confirm what his or her agreement with it or disagreement with it via an email. And if you still have concerns, please feel free to reach out to our office so that we can, discuss any additional details around that. Want to be very, very careful about that because the IGs would absolutely pick up on that.
It's just the reallocating of participant support costs funds is what had me caught up there. But even if you're reallocating within participant support classes, you still want to have that documented. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I want to thank you, Mark and Beatriz and Rochelle, for joining us. I realize we didn't get to all of your questions. Thank you very much. And I hope you'll be able to attend some of the other sessions that are happening this week. So thank you all again, and be well, everyone.